Hello everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. I am Teresa John. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar hosted by the Department of English, St. Dominic's College, Kanjirapally. The speaker for the day is Dr. Reshma Jacob, and she'll be speaking to us on the topic phonemic interactions in multilinguals. Before we get started, I would like to remind all the participants to kindly turn off the audio and video for better clarity and smooth delivery of the presentation. If you have any questions or queries, kindly leave them in the chat box in your control panel. We shall address all of them in the Q&A session. With regard to the feedback form, the link will be provided in the chat box towards the end of the session. With that said, I invite Professor Lega Francis to formally welcome the gathering and to introduce the speaker.
Good afternoon. Very respected faculties from different institutions, research scholars, students, and my dear friends. We appreciate your interest in joining us for the session on phonemic interactions on multilinguals organized by Department of English, St. Dominic's College, Kanjirapally. The topic deals with the theories behind the interaction of different phonemic subsystems in multilinguals. We have got a young, energetic resource person, Dr. Reshma Jacob, Assistant Professor, Christ University, Bangalore. She has completed her studies in linguistics from JNU, New Delhi. Her research was on the technical aspects of second language acquisition and learning. She has published and presented papers in various national and international conferences in the fields related to sociolinguistics, phonetics, and morphology. Besides listening to her, we hope this discussion can lit a speck of burning interest in and related fields. We, the Department of English, extend a warm welcome to Dr. Reshma Jacob. And our principal, Dr. Ansi Joseph, who's a former head of the department and always been a source of inspiration to us. We're very grateful for the creative freedom she gave us to all through these days. And we all gently welcome our principal, Dr. Ansi Joseph, to the program. I extend a warm welcome to the participants from different parts of the country and abroad, our very respected former faculties, our students, and my colleagues to the program. We wish you all an enriching experience and kindly feel free to take part in the discussion after the lecture. Once again, welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Let me now invite Dr. Ansi Joseph, Principal of St. Dominic's College, Kanjirapally, to deliver the inaugural address.
Honorable Head of the Department, Professor Lega Francis, esteemed resource person, Dr. Reshma Jacob, Program Coordinator, Professor Steffi Thomas, invited guests, research scholars, dear colleagues, my dear students. At the outset, let me congratulate the Head of the Department, Professor Lega Francis, and her team of vibrant faculty members for organizing a wonderful webinar on a very relevant topic, the phonemic interactions in multilinguals. Dr. Reshma Jacob, Assistant Professor of Christ University, a well-informed person on this topic, is gracious enough to be here and to illuminate us on this topic. We know that phonemes are the abstract units of the phonetic system of a language that correspond to a set of similar speech sounds, which are perceived to be a single distinctive sound in the language. A native speaker often finds it difficult to identify the differences. But a native speaker uses language effortlessly, but multilinguals find it difficult by these phonological variations of the language. They have to overcome linguistic barriers, semantic barriers, and these phonological barriers, difficulties. And it is Margaret Atwood who has said, word after word after word is power. The language becomes a very powerful political instrument with which one can influence the society and people around. The communication skills, phonological expertise, linguistic capabilities are very productive, and that makes a person very articulative and eloquent, and hence makes him a very powerful person. I hope and pray that our beloved faculty member, Dr. Reshma Jacob, can enlighten us on this wonderful topic, the phonemic interactions in multilinguals. I wish you a wonderful time. And with immense pride and pleasure, and with your consent, I hereby declare that this webinar on phonemic interactions in multilinguals is hereby inaugurated. Once again, I welcome all the participants to St. Dominic's College. Have a nice and enriching session. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, without further ado, let's lend our ears to Dr. Reshma Jacob. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Reshma Jacob. Dr. Reshma, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're very much audible. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So good afternoon, everyone, once again. Thank you so much for inviting me, dear Ansi ma'am and Professor Lekha, Professor Steffi, Professor Juno. Thank you all so much for having me here. And thanks to all the participants, for coming here as my listeners. Thank you for all the kind words and encouragement. So without much ado, I'll start with my presentation. Let me just share my screen once. Is my screen visible?
Yes. The screen is visible, yeah.
Thank you. As it has been already said, the topic of my presentation is phonemic interactions in multilinguals. So Ansi ma'am in her introduction told us what a phoneme is, right? So a phoneme is a distinctive sound in a language. So we'll look at more of the features of phonemes later in the presentation, but let's start with multilinguals. All of us here are multilinguals, right? So unless English is the only language you speak, all of us are multilinguals. I'm speaking to you in English, you're able to understand what I'm trying to say, and you may have another language in your system, even more, more than 2 languages, right? So all of you, have anyway 2 languages in your system. Apart from English, you have your mother tongue. And since we are living in India, we definitely have access to more languages, right? So most of us who live in Kerala know Malayalam, we have learned English in school, and then we are exposed to Tamil movies, and Tamil Nadu is a neighboring state, and therefore we can understand Tamil very well. If not speak, we can understand. And the same way, you also have access to Hindi, right? You listen to Hindi speeches, you watch Bollywood movies, and therefore you can understand it, right? If not everything, you can understand parts of it. So we live in a multilingual world, and India, especially because of its linguistic diversity, we have access to more than 1 language, right? So multilinguals, different linguists have different approaches. People people have different notions about who a multilingual is. So there are 2 stands on who multilinguals are. One is, as Diamond says, multilingualism refers to the ability to understand and speak several languages. So going by this definition, you are a multilingual only if you can understand and speak 2 different languages, 2 or more different languages, right? So just because you understand a second or a third language does not make you a multilingual going by this definition. But then we have a number of other linguists who believe that you don't necessarily have to speak another language. If you use different languages on a daily basis, or maybe if you have different languages in your cognitive system, then you are a multilingual, right? So if you look at ourselves, we may speak and understand a certain set of languages, or we may we may understand, but we may not be able to speak some other language, or we may be able to speak and understand a language but not able to read and write the language. Or there are other set of people who are really fluent, very much proficient in their second language, but the problem is and they have a very rich vocabulary as well, but as they speak, they have a very heavy foreign accent in their speech. Now, are these people not multilinguals? Right? So yes, they are definitely multilinguals. You don't necessarily have to Am I still presenting? Because I just got a message that I'm not presenting my screen anymore. Can someone just confirm?
No, Reshma, we cannot see your screen now.
Okay. It's still presenting. I'm not sure. I'll just do it once again. Sorry about that. Is it visible now?
Yes, it's visible now. Yeah.
Right. Please do let me know if something of this happens again. I'm sorry about the technical glitches that may happen. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Yes. So we're all multilinguals, no matter whether we speak different languages, we are able to read or write, or whether we have a foreign accent as we speak, we are still multilinguals, right? So the point is that we need not necessarily have to have the mastery in all the languages that we have in our system, right? So we have, if you have more than 2 languages in your cognitive system, then yes, you are a multilingual. Now, the question is, how are languages represented in the brain, right? So we speak languages, and as we speak casually in our fast speech, what often happens is that we don't prepare in advance, right? The speech just comes to you like that. You don't frame the sentences in advance, and then you're not reading it out loud, right? You're not thinking as you speak. It just comes out naturally to you. So how is language wired onto your brain? So, as you can see here in the screen, I have managed to get a picture of a brain. It's definitely not it's not as clean. The real brain is not as clean. It's a way more messier than it is. So as you can see here in the picture, our human brain is divided into two. We have a left hemisphere and then we have a right hemisphere. So another thing is that both the hemispheres are asymmetrical in nature. They're not of the equal size. They are asymmetrical, but we do have 2 hemispheres. And the important thing is that each functions, like everything that we do, the functions that we do are localized in different parts of the brain. So for example, I'm speaking to you now. So my language is localized in one part of my brain. I'm moving my hand right now. So the coordination, the movement of my hand is registered or is localized in another part of my brain, right? So anything like whether I read, write, sing, I'm looking, I'm comprehending. So all of these functions are localized in different parts of our brains. And another thing is about lateralization. So the left hemisphere of our brain controls the right side of your body, and the right hemisphere of your brain controls the left side of your body. So if I'm moving my right hand, that is because my left hemisphere is controlling it. My left hemisphere decided that I have to move my right hand, and therefore this is happening. In the same way, if I'm moving my left hand, that's because my right hemisphere is controlling it. So we have something called contralateralization in our brain. And I have another picture here. So this is the picture of the left hemisphere. I'm only taking up the left hemisphere because that is what we're interested in. And this is a side view of the left hemisphere. So you must have come across a patient who has suffered stroke, right? If not in real life, you may have seen such patients in movies at least. Right? So what is important is that you may see that these patients who have suffered stroke, one side of their body is paralyzed, and that is usually the right side of their body, right? And then they may have difficulty in speaking. They may not be able to produce speech sounds. Now, why do you think that happens? That is, as I said earlier, the left hemisphere of your brain controls the right side of your body, right? So if at all a damage happens in the right hemisphere, then that affects the right, if a damage happens in the left hemisphere, that, that affects the movement of your right side of the body. And therefore, a patient who has suffered stroke has problem with movement in their right side of the body. They may be bedridden, they may be paralyzed, and also they have language problem. They have problems in producing the speech. that tells us that the language faculty in our brain is localized in the left hemisphere, and which is why we are looking at the left hemisphere in detail here. So our brain, we can again divide it into different lobes. We have the frontal lobe, it's here in the front part, and then you have the parietal lobe, the upper part, then the occipital lobe, which is behind your head, and then you have the temporal lobes, that is above your ears, right? So we have frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobe. Now, each of these lobes have different functions associated with it. So let's say the frontal region, the frontal lobe of the brain is actively involved in planning or organizing things, right? So you're able to plan things, you're able to organize because your frontal lobe is active, right? And then you have your temporal lobe, which is right above your ears, and your temporal lobe plays an important role in your hearing capacity or comprehension. You're able to comprehend. As I speak now, you're able to understand what I'm saying. That's because, one, of course, you know English language, that is why you're understanding, but even otherwise, you understand it because your temporal lobe is functioning very well, right? You're able to comprehend what I'm trying to say. So your temporal lobe is again important in language, and then you have occipital lobe, which is behind your head, and that is related to vision. You are able to see, you are able to process the images that you see because your occipital lobe is functioning very well. And then you have what you call the parietal lobe. So parietal lobe is responsible for the spatial arrangement, the spatial, comprehending the spatial arrangements or the perception and all of that. Now, since we are interested in language, what we are going to look at is the Wernicke's area here, the one that is marked in red color, and the other one that is in a green color, the Broca's area, right? So these Broca's area and Wernicke's area are points that are in our brain, and these are in the left hemisphere. So Wernicke's area helps us to understand the speech. It helps us to comprehend the speech. And then we have Broca's area, that helps us in the production. So imagine you have, you met with an accident and you had a serious injury on your brain. So if the injury is on the Wernicke's area, then your speech production will not be affected. You may be able to produce speech as efficiently as before, but then you may find it difficult to comprehend what others are trying to tell you, right? So if you ask me about something, if you ask me how is my day going, and if I have Wernicke's aphasia, if my Wernicke's area is damaged, then I don't understand, I will not comprehend what you're trying to ask me. Since you are asking me something, I have to answer you back, and therefore I may talk about something entirely different, and that would not make any sense to the conversation that we are having, right? In the same way, if you have problems with your Broca's area, it affects your production of your speech. So you will be able to understand what the other person is saying. You will not have any difficulty there, but then you won't be able to produce the speech. You really want to say, you want to answer, but you're just not able to produce the speech because your Broca's area is affected. So these are the language areas in our brain, and as I said earlier, different functions are localized in our brain, and left hemisphere is important for our language. So the language is represented in the left hemisphere of our brain. So we know that language is there in the brain, it's imprinted there, it has been localized. So what happens when you speak more than one language? Right? So if you're monolingual, yes, you have Wernicke's area, Broca's area, the language is fixed there. If something happens, your mother tongue is lost, because that is the only language you have in your system, that's gone. You don't have any other language. So what happens when you have more than one language in your system? Which is what we are going to discuss now. So when you have two or more languages in the brain, you have one brain, right? All of us have one brain, and just because you know a number of languages does not mean that the languages has have to be localized in different brains or different parts of the brain, right? So language is for left hemisphere, and therefore no matter how many number of languages you know, it's all there in the left hemisphere. So since we're talking about other languages here, we should also understand the concepts of acquisition, language acquisition and language learning. So I assume all of us here are multilinguals, and we have our first language, our mother tongue, right? So we acquire the language, right? We did not go to school to learn our first language. We just picked it up from our environment. Nobody taught us the grammar of the language, right? So we know how it is. We may not be able to tell the grammatical rules of the language as such, but we just know whether the sentence produces grammatical or not. So that is the first language speakers' inhibition about the language. And then we have language learning. So if you're studying a language in school, then, or maybe, in some other environment, not necessarily in school, it can be anywhere, you're still learning a language because there is somebody else giving you language inputs. You are learning, it's a conscious effort, while acquisition is, it's completely natural. You are picking up the sounds from your environment, but learning is a conscious process, right? So all of us have learned. I hope English is not any of us first language, and if you have learned, if English your second language, then you have learned English in school, right? You were taught by another teacher about the set of grammatical rules, or how to produce a sentence, what kind of words do we have, what are the sounds in English, what are the letters. All of these were taught to us in school, right? So yes, so there is that difference between language acquisition and language learning, and we have dominant language and a secondary language. So if you are a bilingual or a multilingual, let's use the term multilingual, let's stick with that. So if you are a multilingual, then you definitely have one language which is dominant, and that is mostly your first language. You are more dominant in your first language because you acquired it, you are using it. In most cases, you're using your first language everywhere, right? So you are more dominant, you're more proficient in your first language, and the languages that you learned at a later period of time, you may not be that fluent, you may not be that proficient in the second or third languages, and therefore those becomes your secondary language. So the importance is that, why are we talking about dominant language and secondary languages here? So dominant languages, we may not be, we may not make as many grammatical errors in our dominant language. We may not have problems with pronunciation in our dominant language, but all of these, there are chances for all of these errors in our secondary language, right? So there are different variables that determine which one is our dominant language and which is our secondary language. Just because you learned a language first, or just because you acquired a language first, does not make that particular language your dominant language, right? So for example, let's say a speaker was born in Kerala and he or she spoke Malayalam till the age of 15, and then that person shifted to the US, and the only language, so the person started learning English after the age of 15 and has been using English since the age of 15, and this person, let's assume the person is now 45. So obviously, since language input in Malayalam is no more there, that person's dominant language would be English, because they are more proficient in it, in that particular language. They're using English more. The linguistic environment also matters, right? So a number of studies have been conducted on second language studies, as in how different languages are represented in our brain, or how do which language would be the dominant one or the secondary one, how are linguistic features transferred from one language to another. So a number of studies have been done here, and thanks to science and technology that we now have fMRI or such equipments or such possibilities where we can actually see what happens in our brain as we speak, right? So there is brain activation studies. So what happens here is that a multilingual speaker is put into an fMRI scan, and they may be asked to produce words. They may be shown a picture and they may be asked to produce the words in their first language and in their second language. So what happens is, so what happens is that when they're asked to speak in their second language, the researchers found that there is a larger brain activation happening, right? The neurons, or the brain activation can be analyzed in two different ways. One is looking at the oxygen consumption, and then the other one is by looking at the neuron activities. So there could be more oxygen consumption as you produce a second language because you are struggling more. That is your secondary language. There is more activation and more neuronal activations as well. And the more dominant or the more proficient you are in a language, lesser brain activation can be seen, right? So this is, it's interesting how human beings are wired and how languages are, localized in our brain, how it functions, how it switches, how it works. These are all really interesting. And as multilinguals, we should be really proud of ourselves because we are able to handle different languages, right? We are literally like jugglers. We can switch from one language to another just like that, right? So if I decide to speak in one language, I am able to speak in that one language, right? So as of now, English is definitely not my first language. It is my second language. And yet, if I'm asked to speak in English, I can speak in English continuously, right? My mother tongue does not come in between. Maybe I have interferences on phonetic and phonological levels in my pronunciation, in the accent, in the tone. I may have all of those, but I'm not switching to my mother tongue because I am able to control the use of the languages, right? And similarly, we can have, as multilinguals, we switch from one language to another. We mix different languages, and so for example, let's say if I'm having a conversation with my grandmother who does not speak any other language but only Malayalam, then I know I should only speak to her in Malayalam. I cannot, use English because she would not understand. So I know what my listener would understand, and therefore I modify my speech accordingly. And if I'm speaking with my friends who understand both Malayalam and English, then I may switch between one language to another. And this kind of switching is not an error because it does not occur randomly. Even if I switch from one language to another, it would still make complete sense grammatically and semantically, right? So that is not an error, but that is a capacity that we have as multilinguals. So as we can see in the slide, what I meant to say is that we know as multilinguals, we know where to use our first language, second language, third language, or if you have more languages in your system, you clearly know when to use which one, right? So the point is simply that we modify our speech according to our audience. But the important thing to note here is that, as I said earlier, there can be interferences on phonetic and phonemic levels, right? So I am a Malayali speaker. English is my second language, and therefore in English there would be, phonetic transfer from Malayalam would be there in my English speech as well. Now the question is, if we are since we are multilinguals, how are each of our languages represented in our brain? Do we have different systems for our different languages, or are we, are all the sound systems together in one system, right? How does it work is the question, right? So there are different claims So the earlier claim was that, going by Swadesh 1941, the earlier claim was that bilinguals have one enlarged phonological systems, right? So we have phonemes. So phonemes are basically the distinctive sound units. So for example, if I give you the word pin, P-I-N, pin, right? So the sounds would be per, e, na. So all three sounds are phonemes of English. So how do I know that these are phonemes and not allophones, right? So the phonemes, let's take another word here, tin, T-I-N, tin, right? T, E, na. Again, three sounds. Now, if we compare both pin and tin, the only difference is there between the sounds per and t, right? So we have per in pin and t in tin. So if as and when I switch these sounds, I get a totally different word with a different meaning, right? So therefore, I know that per and ter are phonemes of English language, right? So we have, let's say, per, ber, na, ke, ge. All of these are phonemes in English. And if you're looking at Malayalam, then you have all of these sounds, per, ber, ke, ge. And then we have some sounds that are not there in English as well. We have r, nya, na, right? These are sounds that we have. These are phonemes that we have in Malayalam, which are absent in English. In the same way, if you're a Hindi speaker, you have th, the aspirated sounds, th, dh, bh, right? All of these are phonemes. These are all contrastive in nature in a language, and therefore, these are all phonemes, right? So as I said, according to Swadesh, bilinguals have one enlarged phonological system, which means that they claim that all the sounds. So, for example, if you have three languages in your system, the sounds of all these three languages are put together in one system, right? One place. It's all there together. And the explanation that he gives is that this is probably why we have mother tongue interferences in our speech, or L1 interferences on L2. This is what Swadesh thinks, right? But then there are other linguists who vehemently opposed that statement, and going by them, so this is what I'm going to tell you now is more approved, and yeah, most linguists go according to this claim. So according to Weinreich and others, bilinguals have two separate phonemic systems for their coexisting language. So if you are a multilingual, if you are a trilingual, then you have three different phonemic systems. So for example, if you speak Hindi, English, and Malayalam, you have one system for English, you have another for Malayalam, you have another for English, right? So this is what the mostly not believed, I would say, the most linguists go by this definition, this claim, right? So they say that we have separate phonemic systems for our coexisting languages. Now, in our case, let's look at let's try and understand the languages that we speak. All of us have two or more languages, and now you need to see which one is a dominant language, right? So yes, of course, your mother tongue, because you are using that mostly, you may be dominant in your mother tongue, in your first language. And if you have a second language, then the phonetic features of your L1 gets transferred to L2, right? So there's nothing big in it. Like it's not rocket science, right? It's pretty obvious. So if you are only speaking two languages, you learned one language at a later point of time, and then you acquired another language, which is your first language. So when you speak your second language, you have interferences from your mother tongue. Simple. So the question is, what happens when you have one or more languages to the system? Which language would affect the third language or the fourth language that you have in your system? So there is no conclusive answer for it, because it depends on individual speakers, their proficiency, their the age of acquisition, their linguistic environment. So all of these variables contribute to the to this actually. So yes, but we will still try and see how can it happen, how our sound systems are interfering or interacting. So, since we are dealing with more than one language, we should also understand the concepts of deceleration, acceleration, and transfer. So deceleration, those of you who have done second language studies would know what deceleration and acceleration are. So let's talk about acceleration first. So when you have your first language, and if you are trying to learn a second language which is similar to your first language, your you will be more equipped with your second language. The process of learning would be much more easier because the second language is much similar to your first language, and therefore you may not have that many interruptions or interferences, right? So the knowledge of your first language accelerates the process of learning your second language, and deceleration is the exact opposite of it. You may be learning a different language, and that may be altogether different from your mother tongue. It may have different sound system, it may have different grammatical rules, different syntactical rules. In that case, you may find it difficult to learn a second language because it's totally different from your first language. So your knowledge in your first language reduces the process of learning your second language. So that is what deceleration is. And then we have transfer. Transfer simply means that the properties of your first language is being transferred to the second language, right? So again, coming back to what we have already asked, what happens when you have a third language in the system? Is it your first language or is it your second language that affects the third language, right? So that is what I'm going to discuss in today's presentation. So I thought it would be better if I give you a case study so that you understand it, in a better way. So let's look at the case study. So for the case study, I did my study on the English speech of heritage Konkani speakers from Kerala. So the heritage Konkani speakers are, those community who had migrated from Goa in 13th or 14th century. So we're talking about many hundreds of years here. So they migrated many centuries ago. They settled in Kerala due to various political inquisitions and other reasons. They migrated from their hometown, and now the population of Konkani community is very much scattered in Kerala. So we have Konkani people in Kasargod or Trivandrum and even Kochi, Alappuzha. So the population is it's scattered. And we have the Konkanis had also migrated to Karnataka, Mumbai, and other parts of India as well. Now the difference, what is interesting is that since they migrated many centuries ago, the language has changed, right? So the Konkani that they speak in Kerala is different from the Konkani that they speak in Goa. It's different from the one that is spoken in Maharashtra. It's different from that is spoken in Karnataka, right? So each of these languages are influenced by the majority language of the respective states. So in case of the Konkanis in Kerala, their language is influenced by Malayalam, right? So for my study, I have focused on the GSBs, that is the Gauda Saraswat Brahmins of Kochi. Why? Because, when you talk about the Konkani population, I should also tell that they have a very rich culture. They have their caste division, and Gauda Saraswat Brahmins, of course, they are Brahmins and therefore they are the upper caste and have more privilege, and they were able to maintain their language. But if you look at the other communities, speakers of the other communities, they don't really use Konkani in their hometowns, homes anymore, right? So they have switched to Malayalam. They may not, some may use Konkani, but others have entirely switched to Malayalam. So I chose the JSBs of Kochi because they still speak Konkani at homes and within their community. So they are very much knowledgeable and proficient in Konkani, which is why I took them as my subjects. So let's just look at the linguistic dimension of the languages in question. So as I said, we are looking at the Konkani speakers in Kerala, right? So if you look at the socio-political dimension, the majority language in Kerala is Malayalam, right? So Malayalam is the majority language. It is the primary language of the state. It is the official language of the state. And Konkani is only a minority language. And if you look at the order of acquisition, this I'm talking about the GSBs of Kochi, and their first language is Konkani. They have acquired Konkani from their environment. Their parents speak to them in Konkani and they have acquired Konkani. And Malayalam becomes their second language, right? So they learn Malayalam like after the age of 3 mostly. And these days, because of televisions and all of that, there are kids who who acquire Malayalam before the age of 3 as well. So no matter whether they're sequential or simultaneous bilinguals, they are more proficient in Konkani, and then comes Malayalam. And then if you look at the functional dimension, they use Malayalam primarily, right? So Malayalam, they use Malayalam everywhere else, in schools, offices, hospitals, in their workplace, right? Everywhere they use Malayalam, and Konkani is only used in a restricted domain, right? So they speak Konkani only within their house and community, right? So it has a very restricted, very limited use. So, or you can just think of it this, think of a situation like this. All of us have NRI relatives, right? Most of us have NRI relatives, if I'm not wrong, and we have our younger cousins or nieces or nephews who were born and brought up there, and they must have migrated to a foreign land maybe less than 20 years ago, and the younger generation would still not speak our language, right? They would, since they were born and brought up there, they would be more confident, they would be more proficient in the language that is spoken there. So now we are talking about migrating less than 20 years ago. And here we have Konkani speakers who had migrated in the 14th century. So, imagine, keep that differences in your mind. Okay, so the question is, in Konkani is an Indo-Aryan language. We have different language families. So Konkani is an Indo-Aryan language, Malayalam is a Dravidian language, and then we have English, which is an Indo-European language, Germanic language. So we have 3 different languages belonging to 3 different language families in question here. So the Konkani speakers, their first language is Konkani, which is an Indo-Aryan language. Their second language is Malayalam, which is Dravidian. And their third language is English, which is Germanic language, which is Indo-European, right? So there are 3 languages in question which have different typologies, different phonetic systems, different grammatical structures, syntactic structure, right? Everything is entirely different between within these 3 languages. So since they had migrated to Kerala many centuries ago, their language must have changed, right? There must be a lot of Malayalam influences on their Konkani. And as I said, the GSBs, the Brahmin, the upper caste community of Konkanis, they were much privileged, they are much privileged, and therefore they could live as an isolated community for a very long time. They did not mingle with the locals for many years, and therefore they could maintain a lot of their language's linguistic feature, right? So, and then of course they learned English along with Malayali students. So since they're in Kerala, they went to schools here, and some of them have gone to TD schools, which are run by Konkanis themselves, and yet you will have teachers from Konkani community or Malayali community, and even the media, that the conversation that you listen to, or the celebrities who are in the forefront, they're all speaking a Malayali variety of English, right? So we have, the question is whether the Konkani speakers English has a major influence of Konkani or Malayalam. right? So this is what we are going to look at now. So we have three languages in question. One is Konkani, the first language, which is their first language, but a restricted language. It's used in restricted domains. Then we have second language Malayalam, which is the primary language. Then the third language, which is English, right? So we are trying to see which language affects the English speech of the community. And initially, I thought of discussing about the segmental influences and the prosodic influences as well, but due to the constraints of time, I would not want to discuss about the prosodic level, so I will limit my discussion with segmental studies. So yeah, so I'll tell you. So linguistics, most of you I know are from literature background, and I have been told that there are many undergraduate students who join for the session who haven't had linguistics as a paper yet. So it's for them. So just so that you get an idea about what linguistics is all about, or how do we do scientific work? How is linguistics a scientific study? Right? So I'll tell you about the methodologies that I used here. So as I said, I have collected my data from the GSBs settled in Kochi. I did not look at anyone else. There are GSPs settled in other parts of Kerala as well, but I have focused on the GSPs in Kochi. And I have collected my data from both males and females belonging to the age group 18 to 35. And all of these informants were tested for their proficiency. Like, I wanted to make sure that all these speakers, all the informants are proficient in all the three languages, right? And so that was there. And so, yeah, so the methods where they were interview method, elicitation, narration method. So, so that I get a spontaneous speech, I asked them to narrate a story or narrate an event, and therefore I could, that's how I collected my data. Moving on, the questions that we are looking for are do heritage Konkanis of Kerala and Malayali communities speak an identical variety of English? If not, how different are their varieties in terms of their segmental features? Segments are, the individual sounds like p, b, k, d. These are segments, and suprasegmental features or prosodic features are related to the tone, stress, intonation, rhythm, and all of that. So we're not going there. We're only looking at the segments, as in the consonantal sounds and the vowel sounds. And yes, so which language has a greater influence on their English? So this is the phonemic chart of heritage Konkani speakers of Kerala. So these are the sounds that they have. Like, for example, there are certain sounds that are unique to heritage Konkani. We have, aspirated mha, mha. So these are all sounds that are unique to Konkani. Of course, the other Indo-Aryan languages do have these sounds, but, I don't think any Dravidian languages have these. Or, at least Malayalam or Tamil do not have these sounds. Even English does not have it. Right? So, yes, so these are the sounds that heritage Konkani has. And then these are the sounds that their English has. Heritage Konkani speakers, English, have these many sounds here. Now let's look at this. So if you are a Malayali speaker, then you would know that even in your speech, you can identify, you can see all of these sounds. You may not find much difference. So just looking by this chart, individually, you may think that, okay, this looks so much similar like a Malayali speaker's phonemic, Malayali English speaker's phonemic inventory, right? So you would think that it's pretty much, it's the same, right? So there is a high chance for you to believe that, both Konkani speakers and Malayali speakers of Kerala speak a similar variety, or maybe the exact same way. But we need to look more into it. We need to see, we need to, have some experimental evidences to prove it. Just because I say that this is how it happens, that's not enough. We need to back our claims, right? So therefore, I have done an experimental evidence, and I would show you some of that. I'll make it very soon. I know I'm running out of time. So yeah. Right, so this is the phonemic chart of vowels in English, right? So all of this, if you have learned linguistics, you know how it is, right? You have seen this in your textbook. So we have E, A, O, all of these sounds that are there in English. So this is the vowel chart we have. Now, this quadrilateral is, just a pictorial representation of a tongue movement. Now, we know that, as we speak, our tongue is, moving from one place to another very quickly. Sometimes we may not even realize it, but it is actually moving a lot, right? And we know that there are places of articulation for in the production of consonantal sounds. So you may realize that one, but there are movements in our vowel production as well. So for, this is something that all of you can do right now. Maybe you can try saying E and U, E, U. So maybe you can just try saying it and you can feel the movement inside your mouth. You can see how your tongue is moving. So as you say E, your tongue is moving a little forward. As you say U, it's going back. And as you say E again, your tongue is close to your hard palate, the upper part of your mouth, and as you say it's much lower. So that is what we have as the height of the vowel, and then we have the frontness and backness. So when you say E, it's moving to the front part, and as we say U, it's going to the back side, right? So I have a video here. I'll just show it for maybe 2 seconds or 3 seconds. Just see how the tongue movement happens. So this is a live MRI of a speaker as they spoke.
I wish to know all about my grandfather. Well, he's nearly 93 years old.
Right. So the only point why I showed you that is because I wanted you to see how our tongue moves as we speak. Right. So what I've done is I've collected data, I've given them a set of words, or I have looked for certain sounds, certain individual sounds. I've recorded their data, and then I've seen how has their, how are their vowels represented. Okay, so for experimental purpose, I have done an acoustic study here. So I've collected the data. I have run the data through a software called Prath, wherein I can see the pictorial representation of the sound. So I've shown you one example here. So this is a pictorial representation of the word set. So you have sir, a, t, right? So this is how the word set would look. This is a pictorial representation. So this is the sir sound. This is how the waveform for a fricative sound would be. This is how it would be for a vowel, especially for a. And this is how, with explosion, this is a stop, right? So we are looking at the formants F1 and F2. So let's look at the highlighted portion here in the diagram. And you can see a thick band here. So the first one here represents the height of the vowel, right? As in how high is your tongue as you produce these vowels. So this first band here is formant 1, which shows the vowel height. And the second one here shows the backness of the vowel, whether a vowel is front or back. And the third one shows the roundness of the vowel. I mean, let's not look at that. So what we are interested are F1 and F2. So, right, so what I've done is I have given them a set of words. I have taken common vowel sounds that are there in all the 3 languages, Konkani, Malayalam, and English. And the vowel sounds are the basic sounds, E, A, R, O, U, right? So these are the vowels that are common in all 3 languages. So I've taken those and I've given them, words in which have these vowels. And I have analyzed the words, like this, and I've taken the pitch, the frequency, the F1 and F2 values, and I've done a bit of calculation. Since I'm running out of time, I'm not going to take a lot of, I'm not going to explain it in detail. So these are the formant values for these vowels in heritage Konkani speakers Malayalam. So these are Malayalam words, and these are the values for their Malayalam vowels. And here I have their English vowels. So I asked them to, produce English words which have these vowels in it, and these are the values that I received. And this is again the values of Konkani, right? How the values for their Konkani. So we have the values for Malayalam, Konkani, and English. And with these data, I have tried to plot a graph, right? I've tried to make plot the acoustic space or the vowel space of the heritage Konkani speakers. Now let's look at this to see how the phonemes interact. How are they interacting with each other? So the one in red here is the acoustic space for a heritage Konkani speakers Konkani, and the one in blue is the acoustic space for their English, and the one that is gray is the acoustic space for their Malayalam, right? So as we can see, the Konkani one is more prominent, or let's say their English is much more closer to their first language. Remember, English is their third language, Konkani is their first language, and Malayalam is their second language, right? So English for Konkani speakers here in Kochi, their English has a predominant influence of L1, which is Konkani, that is a mother tongue, in segmental level. And if you look at Malayalam, that is, really different from their first language or third language, right? So look, and one more thing that is interesting is that both the acoustic spaces for English and Malayalam occurs within the space of their Konkani. So as you look at this, you can see the acoustic space for English, the one in blue and the one in gray. Both of these occur within their acoustic spaces of Konkani. So from this, what can we tell? What can we say is that definitely, yes, their phonemic systems interact, and their both their English speech and Malayalam speech has a major influence of their Konkani. Both the vowel spaces occur within the acoustic space of Konkani, and their L3, their third language, has a major influence of their first language, Konkani. Right? So we know how the interaction happens. Now, as I said, you can reproduce the same studies for other set of languages, and it's not necessary that in all the cases you would find a similar result. It depends on different variables, different factors like the age of acquisition, the dominance, or the linguistic environment, and all of those actually contribute to this result. So yes, so I'll just skip this. Yeah. So yes, so these are the findings that heritage Konkani English and Malayalam vowels are similar in terms of vowel height, but then it is different when we look at when we look at it in terms of their F2. Those are different. We get different frequencies, and one thing we can tell for sure is that all of these languages interact with each other. They may be fluent, they may be not that fluent in another language. So what we can tell is all of these languages interact with each other, and we can also say that they have different representation, right? So let's look at this chart once again. If there were no interaction, if we did not have separate systems as multilinguals, then we wouldn't have had these three different structures. It would have been the same one, right? But as we switch languages, we make that unconscious switch, right? So there are different phonemic systems, and they definitely interact with each other. So yes, on that note, I would end my presentation here. I took 3 minutes extra. I'm so sorry about that. So yes, thank you so much for being very patient, and thank you for listening to me. Yeah. If you have any questions, I can take it.
Thank you, Dr. Reshma. It was a very informative session. Now I think we'll go ahead and take some questions. Are you ready for the questions, Dr. Reshma?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, all right. I'll read out the first question. That's by Dr. Vidya Joshi. Getting all the prosodic features right while speakers who take up English as a second language or foreign language, What training would be good to get all the stress, intonation, accent, etc. corrected to near native for the learners?
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for that question. So, the only answer is that we need to practice. So, yes. So, let's say we are, most of us here are Malayali speakers. Our first language is Malayalam, and we learned English as a second language in school. And therefore, what happens is just like the segmental features get transferred to the second language, the prosodic features also get transferred, right? So we are talking about two different languages here. The two languages in question here have two different structures. So let's say Malayalam is a syllable timed language and English is a stress timed language. So it is really difficult for a second language learner to get, second language speaker to get all of those things right correctly. Now, the only answer is to understand the stress rules of English. So there are certain rules that we can look for. So you can, maybe try to understand the rules and practice. Practice is the only thing. Imitation is not a bad thing. You can listen to a native speaker and then you can try to modify your speech accordingly. And again, let's talk about intonation, the tones, the pattern of tones. Malayalam has a very unique kind of intonation, right? We have falling and rising and all of that, yes. But even in yes or no questions, we have a falling tone, right? So as I said, the only way is to listen, first identify and understand these differences. If you need to make a change, then you need to understand what are the deviations, right? I would not say these are mistakes. It is natural for a second language speaker to have all these variations. So it's absolutely fine to have your own variety, to have that marks your identity, right? So it's absolutely fine. But if you want to attain a native like fluency, then I would say you first identify the deviations and then try to listen to a native speaker and practice. I hope I answered your question.
All right. We have another question from Vijay Ananda Dash. Is a body language same in case of a mono and multilingual speaker?
Not necessarily, right? So we may even if you're speaking your first language, you are very well versed in your first language, you're very confident in your first language, and yet there are instances where you're nervous, right? You may have to address a gathering, or you are put in a pressure like situation where you are still speaking the same language and yet your body language would change, right? So it depends on various other factors as well: how confident you are, how nervous you are, right? How clear you are about the things that you're going to tell, or how doubtful you are. So all of these things contribute to it. So it's not necessarily about about different languages. What I meant to say is that even if you're speaking your own language in different circumstances, you will have different body languages. So if that can happen in your mother tongue, then of course it will happen in your while you're speaking your second language, because most people are not that dominant or that proficient in their second language.
All right. So another question from Anita Joseph. This question is almost similar to the first one, but still, the problem faced by secondary language learners is a problem with intonation of the primary language. What is the solution for this problem in linguistics?
Ma'am, could you please repeat the question? Your voice was breaking in between.
All right. The problem faced by secondary language learners is the problem with intonation of the primary language. What is the solution for this problem in linguistics?
Right. Okay. So this is a major misconception, right? So since we are second language speakers, most of us think that the only problem that we have with our English is related to intonation. But no, let me tell you, the interference in segmental level is too much that we fail to identify it. Just because you don't realize how just because you don't realize about the deviation that you make in your segmental properties of your second language speech does not mean that there are no differences, right? So as a second language learner, the problems or let's say the deviations are there both in segmental and prosodic. The prosodic is more audible. You hear it very well because that that's entirely different. It's very catchy. So as I said earlier, the solution is to understand the rules of stress, rhythm, and intonation. We can try to understand the syllable structure, and you can learn the rules of it, and then you can listen to a native speaker and practice. Practice is definitely, as a second language learner, practice is what I would say is the best way to learn.
All right. So next question is by Kumar Torit. Why is English language difficult to learn and speak?
um Okay, so I don't know how many of us find it really difficult. It depends on our input, right? So when did you learn the language? So, there are people who speak English very fluently, although English is their second or third language. Or, as I said earlier, as the example that I had given earlier, you may have speakers from our place who had migrated to other, foreign countries, or let's say the US, and the parents may find it difficult to speak English, but the kids absorb it, right? So it's all about acquisition, the age of acquisition, or how much how often do you use the language? How often do you get the inputs in the language? So I would not say the language is difficult. We find it difficult because we tend to learn a second language based on the rules of a first language. Now that should not be done. When you do that, that becomes highly problematic because you are literally transferring all the properties, or you're transferring everything, the linguistic features into your second language, right? We try to identify a sound or a grammatical rule based on a first language, and that can go wrong, right? So what is important, or what is the right method to learn English is to is to again listen to native speakers, or try to understand the grammatical rules. Since let's just say this. So I am a Malayali speaker, and if you ask me about the grammatical rules of Malayalam, I would have no idea. I would not know how to tell you the grammatical rules of it, because I did not learn the rules of Malayalam at school, right? I just know how to speak, and if anybody says something in the wrong way, I would be easily able to understand that that person said it wrong. But I would still be not very confident in producing, in correcting them with the grammatical rules of it. But I can do that for English because I learned it in school, right? So the difference, one example I can say is that Malayalam is SOV language. There is a subject, object, verb order. That is the order, right? And on the other hand, English is an SVO order. Like there is subject, verbs, and then object, right? So that is one difference that we have in the language. And then let's say if you're talking about, if you're a Malayali speaker, then there are no grammatical agreements. There is no subject verb agreement in Malayalam. But in English, there are subject verb agreements. So all of these mistakes can happen, right? So since we associate our second language with our first language, that is probably why we find it difficult. But yeah, if you have the right instruction, if you have the right way of learning, then it should not be as difficult.
All right. So we have another question from YouTube. It's from Rukmini M.
Okay.
Which part of the brain is connected to language production?
Left hemisphere.
All right.
It is left hemisphere. Yes.
All right. Another question. What is the difference between phonemic system and chronological system?
Okay, so phonemic system, when we talk about phonemes, we are talking about the sounds, right? So like I said, ma, pa, ba, ka, these are all phonemes. But phonology is when we try to apply, like, when we're not just looking at the individual sound, but the combination of the sounds. For example, let's say the English plural, right? So we have cat, cats, or churches, right? So the sound is a phoneme, but the phonology comes in as in when we combine these sounds together. The change that the influence that one sound can have on the another one. Yeah.
Okay, something related to the question. What is the difference between phonetics and phonemics?
It's pretty much the same thing, right? So phonetic is, we are talking about the individual sounds again. So it's about the pronunciation, how we produce it. So we can, as you transcribe a sentence, you can have phonetic transcription and phonemic transcription, right? So phonetic is how I say it. Phoneme is how it is there in the language. So I'll give you an example. This is one commonly said example. So the word spin, 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 or PIN, pin, let's consider both these words. And as a non-native speaker of English, when I say pin or spin, I just say the sound per, I produce the sound per. But for a native speaker, when they say the word pin, they would produce it with a little bit of aspiration, as in pin, and spin would be a normal per, right? So the per, per without aspiration is a phoneme, that is a phoneme of the language, and per is, or when I transcribe it as pin, per, aspirated h and I, n, then that is a phonetic transcription. So basically phonetic is about how you say it, phonemic is how it is there in the language system.
All right. Now we have a question from Vishnu Zenith. How is phonics related to comprehension, especially when we read a text to an audience?
Ma'am, could you please repeat the question once again?
Yeah, sure. How is phonics? I don't know if it's phonics or phonetics, I don't know. How is phonics related to comprehension, especially when we read a text to an audience?
Okay. So let me tell you this. The script does not, it's random, right? It does not have any association as such with the sound that we produce. It's entirely random. And therefore, if you are a see, when we read as second language learners, we tend to learn new words through reading, right? So we may not know how to produce the word. And I would say that the script does not have any correlation with how you produce it. Yeah, so that would be my answer.
There's one more question from the YouTube. How could one coordinate between L1 and L2 or L3 in classroom while teaching phonetics?
Coordinate, can that person expand the question a bit more? What do they mean by coordinate?
It was by Sekhawat Ali. I don't know if that person was there.
Okay, so if you want, yeah.
I'll go to the next question.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. How the mental lexicon or the angular rise of brain is working in multilingualism?
Angular gyrus, is that what you said?
Yes, angular gyres of brain is working in multilingualism.
Okay, so your angular gyrus is again, really an important portion in your brain. But, I'm not concentrating on neurolinguistics and I would not be an authority to speak about it. But one thing I can tell you is that angular gyrus plays an important role in, in language production and understanding. It acts as a bridge, basically.
I think that's the end of. Okay, again, another question from Kumar Third. What do you mean by morphology?
Okay, Morphology is again another branch or another, so in linguistics, the basic thing is phonetics, phonology, morphology. So phonetics and phonology deals with the sounds of a language, and morphology is about the word formation. So you have dance plus ing, dancing. Right now, this is the simplest example that I can give, but there are more to morphology. We look at the grammatical agreements, we look at the grammatical gender, and the causatives, the case markers, all of these come under morphology. So basically we deal with the word formation processes.
Okay, thank you. I think we are done with the Q&A session. Thank you everyone for the questions. Now we have reached the fag end of the webinar. For the kind attention of the participants, the feedback link is there in the chat box. Kindly fill it up to obtain your e-certificates. Now, before we wrap up, I invite Professor Steffi Thomas to propose the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone gathered here. I deem it a great honor to propose the vote of thanks on this occasion. First and foremost, I thank Almighty for leading us through this program. What a joy and privilege it is to have a person like you, my dear friend Dr. Reshma Jacob, mesmerizing the audience on a topic phonemic interactions in multilinguals. A very special thank you to Dr. Reshma for attempting such a fruitful session for us. I thank your principal and our former HOD Dr. Ansi Joseph for her presence and her inaugural address. I also extend my thanks to the administrators of college, former faculties of the Department of English, friends of the department from far and near, faculties from other colleges, and from St. Dominic's for joining us today. A special thanks to the technical team and our sincere appreciation to all the participants who joined us today. We thank our dear students and students from other colleges for participating enthusiastically in this webinar. I acknowledge with gratitude the sincere work put forth by the faculty team of my department under the guidance of our HOD, Ms. Leka Francis. Once again, a big thank you to all of you. Have a good day. Thank you.
So thank you everyone for this opportunity. Thank you for listening to me. Thanks to Dr. Ansi, Professor Lekha, Professor Steffi, and Professor Juno. Thank you all once again.
Thank you, dear Reshma and the participants. So the feedback link is posted on the YouTube as well. Please kindly fill it up for obtaining your e-certificates. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day ahead.